Hi everybody, I'm Pete Cook. This is part 6 in the Hydrogen to Human series. In part 1, we laid out the problem of trying to describe the reality we observe just using the laws of physics, and you can't. Even at the most basic level, you can't describe the difference between the energy on a proton or an electron, which is 1.6 times 10 to the minus 19 per coulomb, unless I use aspects of mathematics and say they are positive and negative. That has no meaning in terms of physics. It's just a mathematical aspect which I need to describe reality at the most basic level. Part 2. We used a new description of the universe based upon the laws of physics and the laws of mathematics to describe the reality we observe. We found we don't end up in sticky situations or contradictions. Before there are any physical components in the universe, I have to use just mathematical descriptions. Now it's no problem. We can build the properties of mass and volume using the non-physical aspects which are at the beginning. And then we went on in part 3 to build the simple components of the universe. So we're going from simple to complex. The idea at the minute is that the small bits, the atomic bits, should describe what happens at the larger scale, the gravitational scale. That doesn't work. But simple to complex works in both cases. What happens at the atomic level? It goes from simple to complex at the gravitational level, simple to complex, and it does it both at the same time by stars and elements building each other. A completely new picture of reality, going from simple to complex in a pattern. And that pattern is based upon a relationship between the numbers 2 and 3. We see that inside the quark. So with the quarks that build the proton and the neutron, and then we see it again with the proton, the neutron, the electron building atoms. And we see it with stars and elements building each other because the star, which has gravity, is a relationship between matter and space. It's a duality acting against the two nuclear forces, the strong and weak nuclear force, which now behave as a pair, the electromagnetic force, which also behaves as a pair. I've got 3 pairs of forces. Now let's just show you I can fit that into the correct parts of the standard model. So I can fit the 3 pairs of relativity, the 3 pairs of relationships which cause the forces alongside the atomic parts which we know are correct in the standard model. The quarks and the leptons come in 3 different pairs. We know they're correct because this is predictive. The top and bottom quark were predicted a long time before they were found. And we find that the leptons come in the same pairs, and there is a relationship between quarks and leptons. They can change into each other. That's how a proton changes into a neutron. The difference between these two is the difference between an up and down quark, and that's how I change a proton into a neutron. Now let's put relativity, the 3 different relationships that cause the 3 different fundamental forces. The relationship between matter and space, gravity and mass. That shows up in mathematics as a relationship between the real numbers, atomic numbers, and the imaginary numbers. And the real numbers will have these 2 aspects, one which is symmetrical, positive and negative, electromagnetic, and another which is asymmetrical, odd and even, strong and weak. So I get 3 pairs of relativity. the relationship between the magnetic fields, which are strong, the gravitational fields, which are weak, the relationship between the units of energy, strong units which make matter, that comes in bosons or fermions, very weak units, the photons that make light, that also comes as a pair, electromagnetic waves. So I've got a completely different picture of reality, and I can fit the mathematics together in this diagram here, where I get all the pairs. The imaginary numbers in strong and weak. Strong fields, magnetic fields, weak fields, gravity fields. The real parts, the strong parts of units of energy that make matter, the weak parts, units of energy that make radiation. So I've got positive and negative, positive, negative, imaginary and real. Now they affect each other. And now I've got two more positive and negative parts, which are odd and even, strong and weak. So I get 3 planes, giving me 8 different parts of relationships. Now we have a model called the E8 model, and that's why it works. Nobody was suspecting this. I've got to see electromagnetism as just the same principle as general relativity. What happens in the unit of energy changes what happens in the field of energy, which changes what happens in the unit of energy. I've got to see fermions and bosons, the strong, weak nuclear force. It's exactly the same principle as general relativity. The 2 parts change the behaviour in each other. If I look inside the proton, we don't find a simple system of 3 quarks. It's very complex. It's the gluons, or the bosons, which have all the mass. So I'm swapping all the partners over. They're supersymmetric partners. Underneath my triplets, I get conjugate pairs, simple parts, then the dual part, the triple parts and dual parts. Random and order, the state at the beginning of the universe, the randomness of the quark gluon soup, but the order of the overall beautiful uniformity. And I changed my uniformity into greater complexity in the components as I cool it down. And we saw it was the Boltzmann equation which describes that relationship. Digital and analog. I get waves and units acting against the fields. So there's my little pattern again. This is an algorithm. Energy changing into information. Things which behave at the individual level. The atomic forces affect individual behaviour. So they're very strong. The collective, the gravitational force only works as a collective. It's very, very weak. So I have this beautiful little pattern here which shows my relationships. And now I've got a standard model in which I can put a relationship between gravity and the 2 atomic forces. 2 which are related in the same. So 2 up quarks, 1 down quark. A relationship between gravity, the strong and weak nuclear force, builds stars, they act against each other. A relationship between gravity and the electromagnetic force builds planets. And a relationship between the strong and weak nuclear force and electromagnetic force builds atomic nuclei. And it's that relationship here, the competition between them, and they also cooperate at the same time, produces the energy levels at which the electrons sit. Now these are ordered, the composite parts. The composite numbers are built from the prime numbers, the randomness that sits in the middle. And we see that both in prime number theory and atomic theory. Marcus de Sauty has already seen it all matches up. So now we have a completely different picture of reality in which I can put all the parts of reality into the same pattern as the standard model. All those parts are now correct. Now the parts of the standard model which are not in this pattern can now all be put into the same pattern. So it's not just these parts which build the elements. I can put quantum chromodynamics, which comes in relationships of 2s and 3s, 2 quarks, and then I need 3 colour forces and quantum electrodynamics. I've got magnetic parts, and then I've got the electrical parts, which come in 3s, 0, -1 or +1, which is more complex. It builds molecules, and atoms are much more complex than nuclei. Planets are much more complex than stars. So I've now got a very, very clear picture of how the universe composes itself. First in binary parts, the binary parts of the computer, conjugate pairs, which flip over into the complex parts, which all come in 3s. So let's just see how mass, the relationship between matter and space, builds its own partner. If I've got mass, I've got inertia, resistance to motion in space, resistance to change. That's what it is. A relationship between atomic particles and space. But at the individual level, that's much, much too weak to have any effect. At the collective level, I now get a distortion of space which is going to make the entities spin. Think of stars and planets as digital gravitational entities. It's the digital level. But I do also get analog, I get waves of gravity in between Saturn and its moons. But it's behaving digitally and as an analog system at the same time. Always a double answer. As these units start to spin, gravity, the distortion of space, the distortion of the field, which is behaving as a continuum, at quantum gravitational level, it behaves as individuals, but it always behaves as both, relative to the atomic scale and planets and objects. It's going to make things spin. It's going to behave as a continuum. As things spin, they resist motion in space. That's what mass is. That resistance to change, as it goes in, it spins faster and faster and faster. The change, the acceleration becomes greater and greater and greater. And gravity and acceleration are a conjugate pairs. They're 2 manifestations of the same thing. I get acceleration through space. Resistance to that is caused by mass. So I get another conjugate pair, a relationship between the conservation of angular momentum, the conservation of linear momentum, causing that resistance. So if I'm causing the resistance, but that's what it is, it's the same thing. I've got mass which resists motion in space, but it causes the motion of the planets around the sun or the moons around a bigger planet. So it's causing its own opposing partner. I've also got the cosmological constant. Now that's already in Einstein's equation as the opposing force to gravity. And in later programs, we're going to show you how that's also caused by gravity. So here's a new picture of the standard model. A completely new idea. Now we have inertia or resist. We resist new ideas because that's the way that your brain works. But the logic here, a correct pattern, 3 parts of relativity which comes in pairs, 3 parts of numbers which come in pairs, all matching up as the same pattern. The logic is crystal clear. So in part 7, we'll see that composition being used again and again and again. The same little algorithm, the relationship based upon prime numbers. See you next time.